April 6th, 1909. Robert Peary stands on a sheet of drifting ice, a freshly planted flag fluttering in the cold Arctic air. His frostbitten crew watches as the moment is captured on camera. Then, Peary speaks 5 simple words. "We are at the pole." And with that, one of the greatest frauds in exploration history was born. Back in the US, newspapers hailed Peary as a hero. Congress showered him with medals. Textbooks crowned him the first man to reach the North Pole. But there was just one problem. A year earlier, another American explorer, Dr. Frederick Cook, had claimed he got there first. 2 men, one frozen dot on the map, and somehow both swore they were first. The country immediately split into Team Peary and Team Cook. Peary called Cook a fraud. Cook fired back that Peary was jealous and desperate. Newspapers launched smear campaigns. So, how did the greatest achievement in Arctic exploration turn into a national scandal filled with lies, missing evidence, and 2 men claiming the same impossible victory? For that, we have to go back, way back, long before Peary, long before Cook, to the moment Europe first became obsessed with finding a shortcut to the top of the world. In the late 15th century, Europeans had a problem. They'd finally looped around the Cape of Good Hope to reach India and the Far East. Good news, no more paying Silk Road middlemen who charged like they were running a medieval app store. The bad news, the route took forever. 1 to 2 years of dodging storms, praying your ship didn't spontaneously fold in half, and dealing with southern hemisphere winds that ate sailors for breakfast. The Cape route was a win, but also a collective, okay, surely there's a less murdery option moment. The logic was simple. Earth is round, so the top is shorter. And they were right, mathematically. The issue, the far north was basically one giant ice wall. Nobody was sailing through that. And when a place exists only in rumor form, humans do what humans do best. Gossip. People swore that just past the ice right at the North Pole, there was an Arctic paradise, an open sea, calm, ice-free, practically begging for explorers who loved frostbitten welcome mats. The idea dates back to 1531. English merchant Robert Thorne begged Henry VIII to send a ship north. Henry, unfortunately, was too busy rage-quitting marriages and religions to care about geography explorations. Later, Henry Hudson and William Barents went searching for this mythical ice-free pole. They failed. Spectacularly. But at least they got a river and a sea named after them. People were dreaming up premium content for what lay beyond the 80th parallel. Sea ice only formed near land. Because there's no night during summer, the ice would just melt. The Russians found open water north of Svalbard once, so everything must be open. And lastly, some animals seemed to migrate around the pole, so it had to be a lovely neighborhood, the hypothetical Arctic beach resorts everyone was apparently imagining. Anyway, by the 19th century, people were getting twitchy. There was a chunk of the map that was still blank, and they couldn't draw "Here be dragons" again. So in 1819, as British ships harassed every ocean on Earth, Sir John Franklin figured he'd finish what Henry Hudson started. He launched the Coppermine expedition to find the Northwest Passage. It immediately face-planted. The plan? Start overland from Hudson Bay, reach Great Slave Lake, and go up the Coppermine River to the Arctic Ocean. Then chart the unknown northern coast of Canada. They would get help from Hudson's Bay Company, the Northwest Company, and local indigenous guides. The reality? Whole different story. 1819 was cold. Brutally cold. And it took nearly a year just to reach the lake. The 2 companies argued non-stop. Full mom and dad at Thanksgiving energy, and Franklin wound up with far less help than promised. By winter of 1820-21, the expedition was stuck on the Coppermine River at a place optimistically named Fort Enterprise. Morale tanked so hard that 2 members, George Back and Robert Hood, nearly fought a pistol duel over the daughter of one of the Yellowknife hunters they were wintering with. So far, no Arctic paradise. just cold, misery, and dueling for dares. By June, the weather finally thawed. They pushed north, reached the sea, the Yellowknife guides headed home. Franklin's crew continued in 3 canoes. Shockingly, they made it 500 miles into totally uncharted territory. And then, everything went sideways. Rough seas hit. Winter started creeping back, and the team had to retreat the hard way, across the barren lands, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Even wrapped up in blankets, the breeze cut through them like they'd personally insulted the wind. Food was whatever they could find. Bone soup from half-eaten carcasses counted as a good day. On bad days, they scraped lichen off of rocks. Fungus comes with a guaranteed detox plan, and barren lands didn't come with restrooms. And when the fungi ran out, the team upgraded to their backup boots, lightly boiled. A Michelin star meal if the Michelin inspectors were dead. The main group staggered back to Fort Enterprise on October 12th. Notice I said main group. There were stragglers, and some of them were tricked into eating wolf meat, and that comes with heavy air quotes. When they staggered into Fort Enterprise, they found the rest of the team still starving. The nightmare didn't end until July of 1822, when the survivors reached Hudson's Bay Company headquarters. The expedition was a total failure. 5,500 miles traveled, 500 miles of coast mapped. Half the crew dead, a craving for human flesh, and the Northwest Passage still stubbornly non-existent. Think about that the next time you have a bad day at work. But John Franklin got rewarded anyway. He was elected to the Royal Society, celebrated for his bravery. Others, meanwhile, pointed out the obvious. His last trip was the chef's kiss of catastrophe. And yet, Franklin kept going back to the Arctic. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, left Greenhithe, Kent on May 19, 1845. This time, Franklin bragged about how prepared they were. Nothing like the Coppermine disaster, he said. They had 8,000 tins of food for 3 years. The ships were last seen on July 29th. Then, nothing. The Arctic hit mute on the adventure. It took until 1859 for the first clues to show up. And of course, they were grim. They always are. Franklin died by June 11, 1847. The mystery dragged on for over a century and a half. The wreck of the Erebus turned up in 2014 near Queen Maud Gulf. The Terror appeared in 2016, parked south of King William Island. No one knows exactly what happened, but the fatal journey likely started in the deceptively upbeat Disco Bay in Greenland and ended somewhere in the frozen north of Canada. Bit of a mood shift there. And if you like these map dives, make sure to hit that subscribe button to keep my motivation from drifting more than polar ice flows. In 1852, German cartographer August Petermann published a map Franklin would have killed to have on that fateful voyage. You know, just something to stare at when morale was dropping faster than the crew's body weight. On the map, the North Pole and the open polar sea. Petermann believed a warm current flowed from Japan straight into the Arctic, keeping the ocean ice-free. So what did the explorers do? They doubled down on the delusions. And that's when a new player entered the game, American explorer Elisha Kent Kane. He sailed all the way to northwestern Greenland searching for the missing expedition, and he didn't find them. What he did find was 2 solid years of being trapped under the ice. But Kane and his team survived. He got farther north than anyone before him, and what he saw actually seemed to support Petermann's theory. The channel was ice-free, wide open. So when Kane and his crew returned in one piece, people were amazed, and then realized the dream of an ice-free polar ocean suddenly looked less like fantasy and a lot more like, let's do this. Sure, the Suez Canal opened in 1869 and finally solved the whole Cape of Good Hope is trying to straight up drown everyone problem, but that didn't slow the race for the North Pole. If anything, it hit the gas. Everyone mocked Secretary of State William Seward for buying Alaska. They called it Seward's folly. But for Seward, Alaska was just step 1 of his Arctic world domination tour. Britain was still enjoying planting flags. Russia was thinking about the 1800s version of special operations. Even Sweden got in on the game. Adolf Erik Nordenskjöld, whose Vega expedition became the first to navigate the entire Northeast Passage in 1878. Gold star for Addy. So the US couldn't afford to sit this one out. The Civil War was over. Time to die somewhere else. And that's where James Gordon Bennett came in. Or, more accurately, enter his money. And if you're wondering how this connected to Peary and Cook, you'll find out pretty soon. Bennett was publisher of the New York Herald and walking ATM, if ATMs had chin-strap beards. He bought a ship, the Jeannette, and jacked it up to survive drifting in Arctic ice. Of course not. He was rich. He sent Lieutenant George Washington DeLong of the U.S. Navy, aka the expendable guy. And so the U.S. Arctic expedition left San Francisco on July 8, 1879. Destination, North Pole. Maybe. For a while, everything looked great. The ship passed the Aleutians, reached Siberia, and pushed north on August 31st. Then, September 5th happened. The Jeannette got stuck in the ice and stayed that way until June 11th, 1881. 2 years, frozen like a ship-shaped popsicle. It drifted less than 230 miles. But hey, at least they tested the ice-free North theory. Peterman was wrong. There was no warm Japan to Arctic supercurrent, no Pacific Gulf Stream, just ice. Infinite, soul-destroying ice. 2 days after being set free, the ice came back. And this time, it was personal. It crushed the ship's hull and DeLong's hopes in one go. That's how you multitask. The ship sank on June 13th. The crew set out across the ice and then piled into 3 lifeboats. But not all of them made it out of the frozen hell. One boat, 13 men, had the good luck to run into the local Yakuts, who got them to safety. They all survived and made it back to the US. The other boat, 12 men, washed up in empty Siberian nowhere. They all died. That was DeLong's group. His body was found and finally returned home in 1884. And yet, even with Peterman's theory put on ice, people still didn't give up on the North. In 1903, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen set out to crack the Northwest Passage. His ship, the Joa, was a 47-ton fishing boat, a glorified bathtub with ambition. But he tuned it up with a shallow draft, a 13-horsepower engine, and a plan to hug the coast like he had abandonment issues. And initially, everything was going well. Almost too well. And then Amundsen spent 2 years stuck at King William Island. Classic Arctic. And once again, the real MVPs showed up. The Netsilik Inuit. They taught him the lessons Europeans somehow kept failing. Wear animal skins, not wool. Wool turns into a cold, wet regret blanket. Use sled dogs. Lots of sled dogs. This is the Arctic, not a Sunday stroll. When things finally thawed, Amundsen pushed past on, rolling into Nome on Alaska's Pacific coast. He'd done it. The centuries-old dream unlocked by determination and straight-up delusion. Did it revolutionize commerce? Absolutely not. His ship lives in a museum now, but the survival skills he learned from the Inuit, those would save his life in Antarctica. But he proved the one thing everyone wanted. It actually could be done. And 2 VIPs were paying attention. One was Robert Peary. He joined the U.S. Navy in 1881 as a civil engineer and even served as chief surveyor for a proposed canal across Nicaragua in 1885. But the tropics? Boring. Peary preferred to be cold, which are clearly the warning signs of a madman. The next year, he headed to Qeqertarsuaq, then called Godhaven. It was June 1886, his first time in Greenland, and his goal was beautifully stupid. Cross it by dog sled. The Navy gave him leave. His mother gave him $500 for supplies. Clearly a Nepo baby. Peary even wanted to go alone, but Danish official Christian Mygard politely translated that into, "You'll die immediately." So he went with Peary. They eventually turned back because they ran out of food, but Peary wasn't the type to give up. He returned in 1891 and was far better prepared. Think Rocky montage levels of training. He even brought his wife Josephine, partly to avoid the classic Arctic tradition of dueling over women. His goal? Figure out if Greenland was one giant landmass stretching to the North Pole. Peary almost had to cancel everything on day one when his leg lost a fight with the ship's tiller. He calmly told Josephine, "Don't be frightened, dearest. I have hurt my leg," which is a poetic way of saying it was broken from knee to ankle. Once he healed, the team crossed what's now known as Pearyland. Catchy. On May 3rd, 1892, Peary and his team reached Independence Fjord, becoming the first to cross Greenland. The reward? $1 million. Nah, he found out Greenland was just a big island. But everyone lived, including the expedition's surgeon, Frederick Albert Cook. Cook was born in Hortonville, New York in 1865. He graduated from NYU and looked like a man going places. Then, life body slammed him. His wife Libby died in childbirth, and so did their baby. So Cook did what Theodore Roosevelt did when tragedy struck. He ran straight into adventure. He stumbled across Peary's call for volunteers in Greenland. Cook, being both smart and desperate, pointed out that an expedition probably needed a doctor. He later said he answered the call of the Northland. Peary, grateful for the leg-fixing thing, praised Cook's calm under pressure. But from here, it was all downhill, pretty fast. In 1893, Peary was already planning another Arctic run. The man had the fever, glacier brain, but Cook didn't sign on this time. He wanted to publish his study of the local Inuit. Peary, meanwhile, insisted his book had to come out first. Classic, your life's work is cool but mine is cooler energy. Peary went anyway in 1898, but things were starting to look uncomfortably similar to the doomed Franklin expedition. Friends and family were quietly panicking. You know, the kind where no one screams, but everyone's eyes say he's absolutely going to die. So Cook sailed north, found Peary somehow alive, and patched him up. Peary had scurvy, heart problems, and the aura of a man trying to win a contest nobody else entered. But now Cook had ambitions. He could solo. Why follow Peary when he could chase his own delusions of grandeur? He headed south to Antarctica and claimed he was the first to summit Mount McKinley in 1906. Key phrase there. He claimed. History says nah. That same year, Peary launched his 6th Arctic expedition. At this point, he was convinced the universe had personally chosen him to reach the North Pole. The chosen one energy, the frostbite messiah. But his old doctor had other plans. Cook slipped out of Gloucester, Massachusetts in July of 1907. Destination? Unknown. He told absolutely no one. Peak mysterious explorer behavior. By April of 1908, he surfaced in Enowatok, the northernmost settlement on Earth, a tiny hunting base 700 miles from the pole. Not ideal positioning, unless you're planning something bold, reckless, or both. Guess what he did? In February, he set out following a route sketched years earlier by Norwegian explorer Otto Sverdrup. Cook said it looked promising, which is explorer speak for let's wing it. The team traveled 360 miles in 24 days, surviving on fresh meat and strict rationing of preserved food. March slid into April, and somehow the misery leveled up. Cook said the wind made breathing feel like a criminal offense. But at noon on April 21st, he grabbed a sextant, took reading, and declared, close enough. He had found the North Pole. He even snapped this photo. Old Glory stuck proudly on top of an igloo, the world's coldest Airbnb. Then he wrote a note, sealed it in a brass tube, and buried it in a crevasse. If you can't leave footprints, at least leave paperwork. The trip to the pole was kind of easy. The return, whole different story. Cook assumed the winds would carry him eastward. Nature said cute, and shoved the ice 100 miles west instead. Now they were nowhere near their supply caches, and since it was late spring, the ice started cracking like tacos on a Tuesday. Luckily, they had brought collapsible boats. The first sensible decision in this whole story. But progress was slow. So slow, they basically postponed the idea of going home. They reached Devon Island, hid in a cave, and hunted with spears once they ran out of bullets. Peak this is our lives now energy. But winter actually did them a solid. The ice returned, Smith Sound froze over, and they walked back to Enowatok. There, Cook learned something wild. People weren't shocked because he claimed to have reached the pole, they were shocked he was alive. And Peary, he'd passed through the previous August, headed for the North Pole himself. But who cares? Cook got there first, right? Peary's trip was the opposite of Cook's minimalist misery march. If Cook traveled like a backpacker, Peary traveled like a circus. 50 men, 50 sledges, 246 dogs, a full Arctic parade. They leapfrogged forward, planting supply caches. It had failed in 1906, but Peary clearly had a very flexible relationship with the definition of insanity. He didn't have boats, so he waited for the ice to solidify enough to walk on. When it finally did, they moved 280 miles in a month. Only 6 men tackled the last 134 miles. Peary, 4 Inuit, and his assistant, Matthew Henson, the first Black American to ever reach this far north. On April 6th, Henson asked, "We are now at the pole, are we not?" Peary replied that he couldn't say definitely, inspiring confidence. Then, according to Henson, Peary pulled out a flag his wife had sewn, stuck it in an igloo, and everyone struck a pose like they were ice influencers. The next day, Peary whipped out a sextant and didn't bother to announce the result. Another great sign. But Henson said Peary put a piece of the flag and a note into a tin and buried it in the ice. Meanwhile, Cook met King Frederick VIII of Denmark and offered to send his records to the University of Copenhagen. One problem? He didn't have them. One of his companions, Harry Whitney, had them. Anyway, Peary saw an opening the size of Greenland. He invited the utterly exhausted Whitney onto his ship, but only if Cook's records stayed off. So Whitney did what any sane man would do. He buried them in Greenland and got on the boat. Big brain thinking. And from that moment on, Cook's life went into freefall. That proof photo from Denali? Yeah. Turned out he took it on Fake Peak, the dollar store version of the mountain. Copenhagen scientists examined what scraps of data they had and said, bruh, his sextant copies didn't even match the solar diameter you'd expect at the actual pole. Talk about amateur. Then, because humiliation has a sequel, Cook was tried and imprisoned for fraud a decade later. So unreliable is the academic term. The casual term is absolutely not. That means Peary won, right? National Geographic said so. He got the crown, end of story. Except, no. In the 1970s, the whole controversy blew open. Wally Herbert reached the North Pole in 1969, took one look at Peary's math, and basically said, yeah, he got close, like 60 miles close, but not there. Nat Geo agreed, so both Peary and Cook were lying. The race to the pole? One giant, frosty ego contest. Why all the confusion? Easy. We know exactly where the South Pole is. Antarctica. Real land, real coordinates. When Amundsen showed up in 1911, he planted a flag and went, boom, mine. But the North Pole? It's not on land. It's floating ice. Santa's house is basically sitting on a giant frozen conveyor belt. If he really lived at the geographic pole, he'd need to update his address every morning. NORAD would quit. So you can't plant a flag. The ice moves, the flag moves, your heroic claim moves. And the ego trips didn't stop with Peary and Cook. The race for the North Pole was always political theater. Not long after their ridiculous feud, the world exploded into war. Twice. Not sure if you noticed. Mix in ideology, nuclear weapons, and a frozen arena? Suddenly, the Arctic wasn't just cold. Seward's Folly guaranteed that the frozen North would turn into a battleground once the US squared off with the Soviet Union. If ICBMs were going to fly, they'd fly over the top. Ice wasn't stopping anything, except maybe your hopes and dreams. That meant real military bases, not fur trading huts or cute supply shacks. Think Pituffik Space Base, formerly the Thule Air Base, just 947 miles from the North Pole. Today, it has about 150 troops. During the Cold War, try 6,000. And it was built by a construction army of 10,000. Geopolitical anxiety means dropping a small city on the ice. But Arctic bases need to be resupplied by sea. And with nuclear annihilation in the air, nobody wanted their ships doing Franklin-style reenactments. You don't want to have a battleship stuck in the ice for 2 years. It's awkward. So the US and Russia invested in icebreakers. The Soviets won that race with the nuclear-powered Lenin launched in 1957. Today, it's a retirement home for Cold War flexing. The US had icebreakers, but they ran on diesel-electric. Not exactly intimidating. Then the Soviets tossed Sputnik into orbit in 1957. The US reacted like someone had installed a satellite above every garage. Cue the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine, and America's technological comeback kid. It was Eisenhower's counterpunch, a symbolic America has gadgets too kind of punch. So he launched Operation Sunshine, send a nuclear submarine where no ship had ever gone, under the North Pole. The Nautilus left Connecticut on August 19, 1957, 2 months before Sputnik, ready to flex American engineering. But the Arctic responded with its usual warmth. Ice too thick, go home. The sub had to tap out and wait a year. Embarrassing, sure, but nobody died, so it counted as a win. On June 9, 1958, it tried again. This time from Seattle. The crew powered through the Bering Strait, and guess what? Even in peak summer, the Chukchi Sea ice said, nope, not today, not ever. The Nautilus slunk off to Pearl Harbor to rethink its life choices and maybe take a long, hot shower. But Commander William Anderson had a little bit of that Peary dog in him, the stubborn, mildly unhinged variety. He wasn't quitting just because the Arctic was being a diva. On July 23rd, he tried again. On August 1st, the sub slid under the Barrow Sea. The ice was thicker than expected. The Arctic is allergic to cooperation. Then the Nautilus had mechanical issues. Of course it did. But on August 3rd, it reached the North Pole. It was the world's coldest, most awkward victory lap under the ice. It stayed submerged for 4 more days, then surfaced off northeastern Greenland to radio Eisenhower the big message: Nautilus 90 north. America made it to the top from below. But the race to the North Pole didn't stop. Not even close. In 2007, something happened that felt straight out of 1527, if 1527 had titanium and mini-subs. 2 Russian mini-subs led by former hero of the Soviet Union and part-time Bond villain Artur Chilingorov dove 2.6 miles beneath the surface. They reached the seafloor under the North Pole and planted a titanium Russian flag. Turns out the 21st century still needed some claiming new lands cosplay. Canada's foreign minister told Russia to stop LARPing as conquistadors. Why all the drama? Because the race still wasn't over. The same ice that once swallowed Franklin and half of Victorian England's optimism is melting fast. In September of 2024, Arctic sea ice averaged 1.69 million square miles. The 1981 to 2010 average was 2.4 million. Mother Nature clicked defrost. Melting ice means brand new shipping lanes, ones that could change world trade. Imagine China and Russia casually bypassing the Suez Canal and avoiding every US Navy choke point from the Strait of Malacca. And under all that melting ice, oil, gas, and rare earths, the trifecta. It's basically the world's most inconvenient treasure chest. So the 8 Arctic states started circling like kids fighting over the last slice of pizza. Who owns Hans Island? Canada or Denmark? Does the Lomonosov Bridge belong to Denmark, Russia, or Canada? Whoever wins, drills. And now the US and Canada have beef too, Arctic beef. They both claim the Beaufort Sea. They both claim the Northwest Passage. Canada wants to limit ship traffic to slow climate change. The US wants not that. The North Pole started as a fever dream, a frozen fantasy people literally died chasing. But some of that fantasy, it's starting to look real. The next time you hear about a scientific mission to the North Pole, there's probably another motive lurking underneath. Just like the dangers that are always hiding beneath the ice. The flags may be different, but the race never stopped. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. Really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.